Hey everybody, mel0n here. Welcome back to another video. Today is going to be a very interesting video because we are talking about Keychron's newest mouse, the Keychron M3 Mini 4K, a mouse that's designed for work, office, and hybrid use with a high-performance gaming PCB slapped into it, which makes this a very interesting mouse. In this review, I'm going to be looking at this from two kind of perspectives. I'm going to be looking at this as the perspective of a general consumer, and I'm going to be looking at this from an enthusiast perspective, just because this mouse doesn't really sit in either camp. It's kind of a mix of both, so it makes it kind of difficult to quantify what this mouse does good and what this mouse does poorly. But today we're going to have a deep dive on the Keychron M3 Mini 4K. We're going to find out if this mouse is good enough to compete with other high-end performance mice on the market, and whether Keychron has actually made the best version of their M3 series mice. But let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, as always, a quick disclaimer before we get started. This product was purchased by me. This review has no affiliation or no sponsorship with Keychron. If you are looking for a particular topic, there will be timestamps down in the video description and in the comments. And if you have a question about the product that I don't cover in this review, feel free to leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. The M3 Mini 4K, it comes in at $69.99 USD. It is $19.99 more expensive than the M3 Mini 1K, which we saw a little while ago, which released for $49 USD. When it comes to unboxing, not really much has changed. It's still packaged the exact same way as the previous Keychron mice are. So we have the mouse itself, we have a USB-A to C adapter, we have a USB-C to C cable. We do have this adorable little 4K dongle that's made to look like a tiny little keyboard. I personally really like this. I think it's really cute. And then aside from that, the only other thing we have inside the packaging is a user manual. One problem I had with the packaging is that the old foam they used was really dense and it had basically no flex. And the problem with it is that it made it very hard to get anything out of the box. And on top of that, due to the space constraints they had for accessories in the box, the way the cable was packaged, it was kind of just stuffed into the slot. There was a very good chance this cable is actually going to get bent or damaged during packaging. I remember the cable that came with my Keychron M3 Mini 1K was pretty beat up coming out of the box due to how tightly it was packaged. So Keychron has now moved to this much more aerated, more flexible packing material, which I'm very, very happy to see. And it makes the overall unboxing experience significantly easier, which is a great thing to see. So props to Keychron there for listening to the feedback and changing the packaging material. It's a great step in the right direction. Now, I did have one note about the cable. The cable itself is the exact same, very high flexibility, low rigidity cable we've seen with all the previous Keychron mice. However, due to the higher power consumption required for 4K polling rate, this cable is actually different. So if you compare the voltages of a cable from a 1K version of the Keychron M3 to the 4K version of the Keychron M3, there's actually a big difference. So one problem I did notice is that if you try and use a cable from a 1K polling device with the 4K dongle, 4K polling just will not work. You have to use the cable that comes with the M3 Mini 4K. So if you do end up purchasing this mouse, be sure to keep this cable and mark it somewhere so you don't mix it up with your other cables, because the 4K polling it will not work without this cable. All right, now let's talk about the weight. So if you'll notice here, I have actually modded my Keychron M3 Mini 4K a little bit. I did remove the default skates and I have added on my own skates, and I have also added on grips. So this hasn't affected the weight that much. The mouse initially weighed in around 58 grams, and then with the modifications I've done to it, it weighed in at around 57.19 grams. Now, I will say Keychron is advertising the M3 Mini 4K as weighing only 55 grams. However, it's coming in at 58. We have seen this before with Keychron mice, so they tend to be about 2 to 3 grams heavier than they are actually advertised. And on the site page, it does say 55 grams plus minus 3 grams. So technically it's in spec, but it is going to be a little heavier than it is actually advertised. Now, one thing else I did want to mention is that the weight balancing of the mouse is actually surprisingly good. It's not like super perfect like it was on the Pulsar X2 V2, but it's still balanced well in my opinion. The one oddity I will note though is that for whatever reason, whenever you are fingertip gripping this mouse, I did notice that the back can feel a little heavier under some movements. This was on the stock skates and my custom skates I put onto it. I'm not really 100% sure why. I know the battery is located towards the back of the mouse, so maybe it's something to do with the battery, but for the rest of grips, for palm and claw, I felt completely fine. But seeing as this is a smaller mouse and most people will probably be doing a fingertip or claw grip on this one, I did want to mention it because it's kind of a weird oddity. Now, one thing fans of the Keychron M3 Mini 1K will be very happy to hear is that there has been absolutely no changes in the sizing or dimensions or the shape coming from the M3 Mini 1K to the M3 Mini 4K. So you have the same dimensions of 119.9 millimeters by 65.3 millimeters by 38.9 millimeters. It has the same symmetrical hourglass shape that we've seen on across all the M3 series mice. The shape itself does lend itself best for claw and fingertip grip in my experience for small medium hands. If you have bigger hands, you're going to be primarily primarily fingertip gripping or doing a very, very aggressive claw with this mouse. Now, traditionally with very small mice, due to my 7.5 by 5 inch hands, I have to do a fingertip grip, which is what happened with the Pulsar X2 V2 Mini. However, with this one just being slightly bigger, I was able to get away with a fairly comfortable aggro claw, but it will depend on your hand size and your preferred grip. Now, I previously didn't really mind the lack of coating on the previous Keychron mice because they were more work hybrid mice that happen to be really good for gaming. However, on a mouse that has 4K polling rate that is obviously more designed towards the gaming use case, this plastic definitely starts to show its cracks a lot. The same ABS plastic they've used across all the M3 series has basically zero granularity to the hand, so it's very hard to grip. If you do end up buying the Keychron M3 Mini and you plan on using this for gaming use, I would highly recommend you go for some form of aftermarket grips. Previously, I've used the Soul Spacer grips and those worked very well. I've also used the X-Ray Pad Cicada Wing 1.0s and 2.0s. I actually have the 2.0s installed on this mouse currently, and they also work really well. You can grip the mouse without it, and you can rely on the integrated grips on the side to an extent, but they only go so far. You will be much better off with some form of aftermarket grips. Whatever you can find is going to be better than what's currently on the mouse. So the M3 Mini 4K feels pretty good. It has the same flexing on the sides of the mouse as was on the M3 Mini 1K and the original M3. You won't feel the flexing unless you put like an insane amount of pressure on the sides of the mouse, way more than you would ever do during gripping. On the bottom of the mouse underneath the serial number sticker, you can feel a little bit of a flex here, but that's just because the bottom of this shell underneath this sticker has been milled out to save weight. So understandable, we've seen that happen on the Pulsar Haze 2 and a bunch of other mice this year, but nothing that's going to affect the day-to-day usability. I haven't had any issues with any creaking, any other QC problems, aside from the main clicks, but I'm going to talk about that later just because that's been an ongoing thing. But with the exception of the main clicks, everything else with the QC has been pretty good on the unit itself. Now, when it comes to the accessory QC, this is where I ran into my most problems. So it turns out that after a bunch of diagnosing on my side, my unit actually came with a defective 4K dongle. So I had to go through the RMA support with Keychron support, and in order to get a new dongle, it took almost 6 weeks to get a new dongle, which is an insane amount of time for a dongle. I even made a YouTube video with them explaining everything and going through and showing them the graphs from Mouse Tester, because the issue with the dongle is they would just have power loss issues and the mouse would just stop reporting. I showed them literally everything. I made them like a 6-minute video, and it still took them 6 weeks to get me a new dongle. I don't really care if I have to wait 6 weeks for a new dongle because I was working on other reviews at the time, and I was like, okay, I'll just postpone it to another time. However, if I had a broken mouse and I ordered this as a replacement for my gaming mouse that came in and I couldn't use it for 6 weeks, I would be pissed. The new dongle I did get works perfectly fine, so that's great, but the support time was way too long, especially considering I did their job for them. I told them exactly what the problem was, and it just took forever. And then secondly, the dongle never should have passed QC at the factory at all. Now, this is one area where Keychron has done a very good job with. The Keychron M3 Mini and M3 Mini 4K and even the original M3 are very, very repairable. All you need to do is remove the 2 base skates and remove 2 small little screws out of the bottom. You could run a divider or just your fingernail along the entire side of the mouse to the USB-C port up at the front, and you can just pop the whole thing off. Now, keep in mind, the shells are primarily hooked into each other via this kind of latch towards the top. So it's best to kind of pull them away from the top and kind of bend them from the front of the mouse out. Just be very careful. Now, one thing I did note during disassembly, the side clicks are just here on a little daughter board, and it is very easy to sometimes knock this daughter board out of place when taking it off. If you do that, it's very easy just to put it back into this holder, so don't worry about that too much. But overall repairability is very good in my opinion. It's very easy to replace the battery, which you can also mod to have a lighter battery if you want to cut down the weight a little bit. There is a 600 milliamp hour battery in here by default. You could drop that to 300 or whatever you'd like. Just keep in mind that's going to heavily affect your 4K performance hours. The daughter boards here for the side clicks is also pinned on with a 3-pin here, so it's very easy to replace that as well. And overall, the repairability is pretty good. I'm not really sure about soldering off switches and that kind of stuff, but in terms of doing just general maintenance, replacing a battery and that kind of stuff, it's very, very easy to do so. But overall, it's very easy to service. All right, so let's talk about the main clicks. So these main clicks are pretty much identical to the main clicks we saw on the Keychron M3 Mini 1K. I'll give you a little sound test here. So the click does have a slightly convex feel on the actual click itself. These are using the Wano transparent shell pink dot switches, or the blue shell pink dot, whatever they're called. Like, Wano's naming conventions are really weird. They do have about a medium actuation force. They are quite spammable. I'm used to the heavier switches, so this does feel quite light to me, but if you're used to lighter switches, this may feel a little heavier, but it's going to come up to personal preference. They have fairly low pre-travel, but they do have a fair amount of post-travel. Now, as we've seen on previous Keychron mice, you can force the clicks down past the click point pretty easily into the shell, due to the click itself actually being quite flexible because it's just plastic, and the only support it has is the frame underneath it. So it would be nice to see Keychron maybe raise this frame up by maybe 1mm or 0.5 millimeter or so, just to kind of prevent that bottoming out feeling on the main click. But it's not the end of the world. It requires way more force than you'd ever need to actually click the mouse down to have that happen. You have to push it in. So it's not the end of the world, but the clicks do feel pretty good. Even for gaming performance, they feel quite good. They're very spammable. They have a nice little tactile click to them. I really do like the implementation of the Wano switches here. They do feel really good. They just have these same issues we've had seen on the previous Keychron mice. Now, one other thing that is carried over, unfortunately, with the main clicks is the issue with the stabilization and the issue with the clicks not being indented. So I have talked at length about the indentation of the main clicks. TLDR, for people with bigger hands like myself, if you are claw gripping the mouse and you hold your thumb towards the end of the mouse, your skin can kind of actually fit into this gap and prevent the main click from actually actuating, which is a huge problem since this is an office mouse that has kind of been jerry-rigged into a high-performance mouse with a new PCB. I didn't really expect this to be fixed on M3 Mini 4K, but it is still annoying to see it here because for me with big hands, this happens a lot. In fact, I actually took the mouse apart and it actually turns out it's like stupid easy for them to fix this because they could just raise the side of the shell here up by like 2 millimeters and just like shave down the clicks on both sides by like 1 millimeter, and this issue would be completely fixed. While they're at it, they could also fix the stabilization problem, where you'll see here that on one of the clicks there's a stabilization rod, but on the other one there is also a stabilization rod, but when they're put into the mouse, one of them rests into the corner of the frame and the other one does not, which means that your left click is going to have that same issue where it's extremely wobbly towards the top of the click. Now, I've never had the wobble actually affect the performance of the mouse. It's just like a pet peeve of mine that I've noticed across all the Keychron mice, and it just bugs me that there's a stabilizer there that has nothing resting against it. They could even put like a little 2 millimeter notch of plastic just to keep it from going out too far, and they could just fix this issue entirely, but they just haven't done it for some reason. If you are someone who's sensitive to wobbly clicks, especially on the left click, you may not like this mouse. And if you have bigger hands, especially a bigger thumb like myself, you may have issues with the main click actuation being prevented by your grip. But overall, I've gotten so used to it, it hasn't affected me at all, but it is something I wanted to note in the review because it is still an issue that has not been resolved by Keychron. All right, let's move on to the side buttons for the Keychron M3 Mini 4K. So I'll give you a quick little sound test. So the positioning is quite high in the shell. It is high enough where my bigger hand, like myself with my 7.5 inch by 5 inch hands, if I was palm gripping this mouse, I could run my entire finger underneath it without hitting the buttons, which is nice to see. The positioning is good in my opinion. In terms of actually actuating the buttons, the first button is very easy for me to hit with my bigger hands, but the back button is almost impossible for me to hit without shifting my grip. For smaller, medium hands, it's going to be completely fine, but for big hands, it's a little hard to hit the back one. So if you are someone who does rely on the back button for anything in games, that kind of stuff, that is something to note. The button size is these kind of half chip shaped buttons. They have like squared on one side, they're triangulated on the other side. I have no real problems with the buttons. They're primarily flat on the surfacing of them. They're pretty easy to hit, and I haven't had issues where my finger kind of slips off of them like I did on the X2 V2. So overall, they're completely fine. I've had no problem with them. They've been the same as we've seen on every single other Keychron mice. The switches are Wanos, but I haven't been able to tell what they are. I've looked extensively onto what this switch is, and I cannot figure out what it is. I know it's a Wano switch of some kind, but it's just I can't find the switch anywhere. It's not a Wano white shell either, because that's the one that's being used on the scroll wheel click, and it's not that, it's something else. So I don't know if these are like a custom Wano shell or if this is just a Wano covering put on a different type of click. I don't know what they are, but regardless of what the mystery Wano switch is, they do actually feel quite good. They feel similar to the main clicks, but they're quieter and they have a lighter actuation force. They are very spammable, which is nice to see with side buttons. Minimal pre-travel. There's a fair amount of post-travel, similar to the main clicks, just due to the way they're installed into the side of the mouse. They're just kind of on this little plastic thing that just kind of clicks into the side of the shell. You can force them out quite far. So like if you put enough force in this, you could push this button all the way through into the mouse. So that's something to note. The plastic and the PCB does kind of hold it from going too far, but I wouldn't put like an insane amount of pressure on the side button. Aside from the issues with being able to bottom them out super far, I haven't had any problems with them. They feel pretty consistent. They feel very similar to what we've seen on the Keychron M3 Mini 1K. All right, let's talk about the scroll wheel and the scroll wheel click. I'll give you a little sound test here. So the scroll wheel encoder is the F switch 11mm encoder, and then the mouse click is the Wano blue shell white dot switch. The click is fine. The scroll feels quite good actually. Now the scroll wheel does have this rubber tri-wing texture. It's like the inverse of what we've seen on the side grips. I have no problem with it. I've never really had an issue with it, but then again, I'm not a person who uses a scroll wheel for anything other than scrolling web pages and pinging in game. So if you use this for jump or any other more intensive application, your results may vary, but for my limited use case, it's been completely fine. I haven't had any problems. The scroll is about a medium strength, but it does have a very nice tactile hump whenever you reach a scroll point. It feels quite good. The click feels very similar to the side clicks, but it just doesn't have the bottoming out as you have with the way that's indented. With this one, you actually can't really bottom the switch out because it hits the PCB. All right, now let's talk about the sensor performance. Now, the biggest thing you're going to notice here is that the sensor is staying the same. It is still the 3395 sensor we've seen on all the previous Keychron M3 Mini mice. However, the biggest difference between the M3 Mini 1K and the M3 Mini 4K is going to be the MCU. So the M3 Mini 1K was using the Telelink MCU, whereas the Keychron M3 Mini 4K is using the Nordic 52840 MCU. Now, this is going to be the biggest difference. This is what allows the higher polling rate performance, but it also does allow some big changes in terms of overall latency, battery performance, and a bunch of other things. Now, in terms of getting actual numbers for the latency changes and the overall performance changes, I do not have ways of testing that, unfortunately, on my current computer because I am limited to 144 hertz. So my recommendations of this is going to be based off of feel, which I know is very inaccurate, but unfortunately it's the best I can do right now. Once I have a better way of testing high polling rate performances and click latencies, I will definitely make an updated video about all of the mice I've previously covered, including the Keychron M3 Mini 4K. But for now, we're gonna have to go off kind of how it feels to my hand. And to be honest, I have no problems with it. It feels very good. Keychron mice have always had very, very good sensor implementation, which is always weird because they're intended to be like just kind of general hybrid mice, but they just happen to have really good gaming performance. And this is the exact same situation here with the M3 Mini 4K, where it just has incredibly good gaming performance, but it's made even better with the inclusion of 2 and 4K polling rates. So overall, the sensor implementation is very good. I'm very happy to see it again. It just feels very good overall. Again, note once you get out of the box, it will have ripple and the clicks will be defaulted to 4 ms debound, so make sure you adjust that to your desired values. But overall, I have no problems with it. Compared to the other high polling rate mice I have, such as the HyperX Pulsefire Haze 2 and the Razer Death Adder V3 wired 8K, the 4K polling performance felt pretty much identical, but again, I don't have ways of actually testing the number values between them, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But in my experience, I've had no issues with them. They feel very consistent, and just overall, it's a great experience. So the M3 Mini 4K does support Bluetooth connectivity, wired connectivity, and of course the 2.4 gigahertz wireless connectivity. The only difference that you're going to see here is that the wireless connectivity for 2.4 gigahertz supports 4K polling rate as opposed to 1K polling rate. Now, one thing I did want to note, the 4K polling performance is not available over the wired connection. It is only available during the 2.4 gigahertz wireless. Now, in terms of the Bluetooth connectivity, as we've seen on all the previous Keychron M3 mice, it will drop your reporting rate to 125 hertz, so keep note of that. But the Bluetooth connectivity worked completely fine. I had it connected to an iPad and my iPhone, and I had no problems. It worked completely fine. Alrighty, let's talk about the battery on the M3 Mini 4K, which is, in my opinion, is the other really huge upgrade here that isn't really advertised that much. So of course, aside from the M3 Mini 4K having 4K polling rate, another thing you're going to be getting with this mouse is an insane jump in battery performance. Because this is no longer using the Telelink MCU that was found in the 1K version, it is using the Nordic. There is a huge difference in power efficiency. The 3295's power efficiency plus the Nordic's power efficiency is just stupid and makes the Telelink MCU on the previous M3 Mini just look like a complete joke. The battery life is drastically better on this mouse. It is like night and day difference. I would say it's actually up there with the battery performance of the Pulsar X2 V2, which is the only other mouse I've used this year that has just like ridiculously long battery life. I would put it in the same bracket as that. I'm very impressed with it. Even on 4K polling performance, the battery lasted insanely long. Now, if I remember correctly, Keychron is saying that on 1K polling rate, the M3 Mini 4K is supposed to last around 135 hours, and on 4K polling performance, it's supposed to be around 40 hours. From my experience, those are fairly accurate values. Again, I wasn't able to do a full long-term testing because I don't have a mouse juggler, so I was kind of going off of just daily use. But in my experience, it's been fairly close to those values. I think I've only had to charge the Keychron M3 Mini like maybe once or twice since I got it, and I think the only reason I had to do that is because I was using it on the 4K polling rate. Now, of course, I don't have the most accurate power data, but with my limited testing, what I've been able to do, I'm very impressed with the overall battery performance in M3 Mini 1K. It is just night and day difference. I would definitely love to see all future Keychron mice not have the Telelink MCU. I would love to see Nordic going through. I am more than happy to pay the extra $20 premium for the higher polling rate and the massively improved battery performance. In my opinion, that's like the biggest upgrade from the M3 Mini 1K to the 4K in my opinion, but I'm very happy with it overall. It's a very good implementation and just the battery life is just amazing. So great to see that. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about was the stock skates on the M3 Mini 4K. Now, these are the same stock skates we have seen on every iteration of the M3 from Keychron so far. These are these harder Teflon PTFE skates. They almost have like a glass-like kind of feel to them because they are very hard. They do work really well as high durability skates for work play performance because it's kind of like the skate on a Logitech MX Master. You don't want to replace the skate on that just because you're using it for work, so who really cares about that? However, on a mouse that is more gaming optimized, it would be nice to see Keychron move towards more PTFE skates in the future, because while these skates are fine, they're definitely not that great for gaming performance because they are very hard and they are very fast, and they do have some issues with using them on specific pads that can feel kind of uncontrolled, and they're definitely not that great on glass. So maybe on future high performance mice it would be nice to see some like pure PTFE skates from Keychron. I did end up removing my skates to number one, disassemble the unit, and of course also test out these X-ray pad obsidian skates. So you can just remove them and swap them out to whatever skate you like. They do have the little skate removal ramps, which is nice to see, and you can just put whatever custom skates on them. Now, I wouldn't really recommend doing it on the previous mice because those are more work mice, but on a gaming mouse, I highly recommend going with aftermarket skates because the performance is going to be much more consistent. So the Keychron M3 Mini 4K is using the Keychron engine software that has got leaps and bounds better from the initial version that I used when I first got my M3. It is significantly better now, which is a great thing to see some more improvement from Keychron in that area. The onboard memory is good. It does support 5 onboard profiles, which can be swapped between your mice via the Keychron engine software, which is nice to see. The mouse showed up in the engine software immediately. I had no problems. Basically just plug it in, turn off ripple, which was on by default. The click debounce was set to 4 ms by default. I did drop that down to 2, or you can drop that down to whatever you want to do, but after that you realistically never have to use the software again, and the software is very lightweight. It just works. It's very nice to see. I'm very happy with it. It's up there with Pulsar software in my opinion. I've had very minimal problems for it, and it also does support multiple devices at one time now, which is nice. That's a great thing to see as well. Now, one thing I would like to see in the future is that since the mouse does support multiple profiles, there is currently no way of actually changing the profiles without using the software. It would be nice to see a button combination for this where you can hold down the DPI and the reporting rate button on the bottom of the mouse to switch the profiles, and then have the profiles be assigned to an RGB color on the top indicator. That would be something that's welcome to see in the future. Personally speaking, I don't use multiple profiles, but for people who do, that would be something nice to see. It would also be nice to see firmware updates and software updates for the dongle and the mouse itself included in the box. When I did get my new dongle after the RMAing, I did have to do a firmware update on the dongle and the mouse itself out of the box. So that would be something nice to see as well, at least a little indicator saying, hey, your mouse is out of date, please go to this website and update it, or have the updates locally inside the software would be a welcome addition. Now, one other feature that is carried over from the rest of the M3 series onto the M3 Mini 4K is the onboard controls. Now, I actually didn't expect to find these on this mouse, considering this was more a gaming mouse in my eyes, but this actually did I'm actually happy to see it still carry over, which is really nice to see. So on the bottom of the mouse, you'll find the rocker, which controls the connectivity from the 2.4 gigahertz or the Bluetooth, or powers the unit off. And then there is also the onboard controls for the report rate toggle and the DPI toggle. And then on the top of the mouse, there is a small LED indicator, which indicates your connection type, your battery level, and your connectivity status, etc., etc. Very minimal in terms of how the LED light really communicates stuff, but since there is the Keychron engine software that communicates a lot more information, it's not the end of the world. It's still completely usable. So it's nice to see that. And I am very happy to see the onboard controls still being here on the M3 Mini 4K. So what do I think about the M3 Mini 4K? I think that this is a test mouse from Keychron. And what do I mean by that? Keychron has been doing this. We've seen this before where they have released new versions of mice just to kind of see if they work. The biggest problem I have with this mouse is that the shell is the biggest weakness of this mouse. The actual raw performance of this mouse is fantastic. If you put the PCB from this mouse and put it in the shape of like any other mouse in the market, I'd be very, very happy with the performance. It's just the biggest weakness is this shell, because this shell is not designed for gaming. It's designed as a work hybrid mice. So having a consumer grade kind of work shell mouse shape with a PCB that gives it 4K polling performance makes this mouse not make a lot of sense in my opinion. And the reason why I think that this is a test mouse from Keychron is that Keychron has been working on a GPX competitor for a very long time, which is crazy because they've released so many mice this year and they keep pumping out new mice every couple months. And it's crazy to think that they're even working on another mouse. My thought is that Keychron is using this as a tester mouse to see how their 4K polling performance is implemented, how it feels, and if there's any issues they need to fix on it. It's kind of a confusing thing they've done here, but I do think it's needed in their case because one thing that I've noticed is that Keychron has been continually improving. Comparing the Keychron M3 Mini 4K to the original M3 is like comparing a duck to a walrus. It's not even the same mouse. Even though it's made by the same person, they have made leaps and strides in a lot of their things. The battery performance has gotten better. Polling performance has gotten better. Build quality has gotten better. Accessory QC has gotten, there's still been some problems, but for the most part, things have been getting better. Oh, and software has also been vastly improving. The one thing that hasn't changed has been the shell. And again, the reason why I think this is a test mouse is because Keychron has obviously already made that shell. They have already focused on that shell, and I feel like they're putting more of their R&D budget into, let's optimize this, a GPX competitor M4, whatever they end up codenaming it. Let's put all of our R&D budget into that and release a 4K polling version of some of our mice to test out the 4K performance so we know what we're getting into, because there's nothing worse than releasing a gaming mouse with bad performance, which in my opinion is the smart thing to do. Do I wish they were doing this a little differently? Yes. Do I wish that they changed the shell in the M3 Mini 4K specifically to be a little more optimized for gaming? Absolutely. Is this going to be the stepping stone that makes Keychron's final gaming mouse the best mouse that they have ever made? Absolutely. Is the Keychron M3 Mini 4K a bad mouse? No, not at all. This is genuinely a very good mouse. From a raw performance mouse, this is one of the greatest mice I've used this year. Like, I'm even in my head right now debating taking the PCB out of this mouse and slapping it into my old SteelSeries Prime or another shell just so I can use the feel of this mouse with a different shell. That's what I'm like, that's the limits I'm going to figure out a way to use this mouse properly. It's just one of those weird things where this mouse isn't designed to be a high performance mouse. It's a work hybrid shell with a high performance PCB. What Keychron has kind of done here is kind of similar to like taking like a Dell Office mouse and slapping in the PCB from like the Razer Viper Mini Signature Edition. It makes no sense from a consumer perspective, because why the hell would you do that? But they need a way to test the high polling performance on units on the market, which makes sense in my opinion. It just is weird and it's kind of confusing. Overall, do I recommend buying this mouse? If you are a consumer who wants a small hybrid mice for work and you just don't really care about high polling rate, you like the dongle because it's kind of cute and people at the office are going to talk about it, and you just want a small lightweight mouse that does the job, sure, go for it. It's 70 USD. I think it's worth it for a consumer, like very light play kind of a situation. From an enthusiast point of view, no, because this mouse does not stack up to the other mice in its price point due to the limitations of the shell. Yes, a lot of the other mice in this price point are wired, and this is wireless, so that is a bonus that does kind of push the Keychron M3 Mini 4K a little more in the favorable side, but at the same time, it's just a bad shell. You can't take a high performance PCB and shove it into an office mouse and expect it to perform to the same extent as other mice. And I generally do think that next year Keychron is going to be a big name that's going to make a big splash in the gaming scene, because whatever they're cooking in the background, I genuinely think that it's going to be a very, very, very solid mouse. The M3 Mini 4K is a good mouse, just flawed execution in terms of the shell shape. But yeah, anyways, that is going to be my everything about the Keychron M3 Mini 4K. Thank you for watching. I know this was a long video, as it tends to be with Keychron mice as of late, because there's always been a lot to talk about, but I do appreciate you guys hanging out. If you do want to learn a little bit more about the Keychron M3 Mini 4K and you want to pick one up for yourself, I will have the product link down in the description for you to check out. So thank you very much again for watching. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Peace.